Good morning, John. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Well, I'm Elizabeth. I want to welcome everybody to the College and Prep Future Spotlight series. We are thrilled to be here with John Barrengos from the Putney School today. And as you know, at College and Prep, we just love this process of matching students with schools and finding that fit where the needs and the wants of the student, what they're really looking for, what the family is looking for, connects well with the school. And Putney is such a wonderful place. We're excited to have you here. If you could start with just a few words of introduction for yourself and for Putney, and what drew you to the community when you started there?
Well, thank you very much for having us. We're delighted to be included in the efforts that you're making for your families. My name is John Barrengos. I have the honor of serving as Director of Admission and Financial Aid at the Putney School. I'm in year 9. My pronouns are he, him, his. And Putney is one of the coolest schools on the planet. And I've got to figure out a more formal way of saying that, but that's very much how I feel. Putney has about 225 students. It's mostly boarding, about 3/4, and the culture is driven by the boarding program. And it's just terrifically progressive in particular ways. And when we talk about what makes Putney different from other schools, we're often talking about how more than we're talking about what. So as a start.
Great. And is that what drew you to Putney? Is that what, when you were sort of looking at your options, really stood out to you?
Actually, there are a lot of things that drew me to Putney. At the time that I was looking for the next change, I had actually finished up a headship of a K-8 school and was looking for a chapter in my family's life that would let me have more time as a dad and a husband. But we were also looking for a school that matched us philosophically, my wife and I, as educators. She serves as the Dean of Faculty at Putney. But also as parents, we were looking for a place where we had a lot of confidence that the school was going to be able to take in our kids, embrace them in the community, socially and emotionally, but also give them a real chance to flourish intellectually and creatively. And this is a very special school in those ways.
Mm-hmm. And what is it you think that, from an academic and creative point, what is it about Putney that really allows students to flourish in that way?
The way I think of it is that schools are distinguished from one another by the intersection of their educational design and their culture. And I think at Putney, the thing that makes the magic work for us is that we've got a culture that does not, and in contrast to most conventionally configured schools, does not focus on competition as the sorting mechanism. Putney is not about a dichotomous version of good and bad, victorious, defeated, A's and D's. It's just not that kind of a place. Kids come with real engines of ambition, and they can be very competitive. But the culture does not reinforce that. And as a result of that, the kids and the adults are invited to be themselves in a way that doesn't have them chasing some notion of what cool is or what successful is. The tacit agreement among the kids, I think, is you get to be you as long as I get to be me. And it works wonderfully. It makes it a very accepting community, and it gives kids permission to really lean into their passions and their curiosities, even as they're going through a school and they're still taking classes that they may not love. But the cloak of achievement as the only thing that a school is about is just not part of our culture.
Mm-hmm. And obviously there are so many different ways to view a school, right? There's the academic piece, the sports piece, the creative piece, and then there's this sort of transcendental piece around it that is how the students inform the culture. And I know that Putney is really intentional about allowing the students' agency and voice at Putney. Could you talk a little bit about the various ways that happens?
Sure. It's one of the most distinctive features about the school. That notion that I focused on of being less competitive is married to this other piece, which is we're trying to create an environment where students can take up their voice and their authority to take responsibility for themselves, but very much for their community too. So students, for example, all have what we call work jobs. They're always literally engaging in labor to help make the school operate. So we have a dairy farm that is operated on campus. And by and large, the students are the ones that are operating it. Students are the ones that are designing, configuring, managing, overseeing, and fixing problems when 225 students are being funneled into different jobs to operate the dairy farm, or to help clean or do maintenance, or help the dining hall function. So kids have nothing, it's not at all decorative. They have substantive and real responsibility. They manage one another. They actually learn from one another too. So the student who's on barn crew in their first year and may not know anything about barns or animals or cows or any of it, they're going to learn about that from a place of not having knowledge. And it's not as if they're going to be judged for not having knowledge. They don't come in feeling, oh my goodness, it's terrible that I can't do this. They are welcomed into a work crew by a work boss who is another student. And they're teaching one another how to do these things, and they're building capacity. What that does at the school is it normalizes, it makes quite normal the idea that we learn from one another, that we start from a lack of knowledge to build skills and knowledge, that this is in service of the community. And you can imagine that that experience in their work jobs leaks into the classroom. So when I teach a social psychology class, it's not as if the kids are in charge, but I design a class so that the kids taking up their voice and their authority and as much choice as possible in their journey in the class works a lot better that way if they do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, to sort of go back to some of the nuts and bolts of the academic program, can you talk about the types of classes that are offered and the design of the curriculum?
Sure. And I would defer to our view book, which does a much better job than I do. But in some ways, those of us who are parents who are looking at the Putney program, I would show them a progression of courses that kids take over 3 or 4 years, and they would see things that are familiar. Kids are taking something that equates to English in each of the years. They're getting as far as the 3rd level of a foreign language, inevitably. They're getting as far as they can in math, depending upon their college ambitions. That will be a factor that plays in. But in many ways, you could look at the program and say, well, that's actually a set of courses, study, content, skills that kids are picking up in a lot of places. And in that way, you could make the argument that it's comparable to a lot of places. And I think it is. It's the how that they're doing it that distinguishes. It's that notion of students learning, even in their freshman year when they're taking what we call Humans in the Natural World, which is a multidisciplinary course that includes English and social studies and biology, and actually consumes nearly 2/3 of a freshman's schedule. If you ask a 9th grader 2 months into their time at Putney, hey, how structured is your experience? How much are the adults on top of you all the time? They would not say, oh, they're really all over me. And they would not say highly structured, because there's a degree of choice that the kids get to exert over their free time, over afternoon blocks, over some evening times. They feel like they're respected as adults who get to make choices. And yet, if we look at the actual structure of their time as students, most of it's already booked. And if you add the math or the foreign language, you've got a reasonably busy schedule. So in some ways, it would look pretty normal. The places where it varies in terms of what they're taking have to do with the evening arts program and the project weeks and the independent study. And those are arenas where we invite students to literally construct some of their learning with a faculty advisor. And that's immensely cool. And if you want me to, I can tell you more about project weeks and independent studies, but those are ways where the program does look a little bit different. And I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, Elisabeth, but I hope I did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think inevitably there are going to be, sort of those core classes that everybody needs to move through. But I think the distinguisher for Putney is some of those ancillary classes or programs that round everything out. And you mentioned Project Week and Independent Studies. If you could speak a little bit to those, that would be great.
Yeah, Project Week is one of the cooler features of Putney, where for 2 weeks at the end of December and 2 weeks at the end of May, students have an opportunity to dive deeply into an area that interests them. For students who are coming in as new students in 9th grade, sometimes the idea of doing a Project Week as a solo venture is intimidating, and they can sign on for group projects. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of kids will sign on for group projects, and teachers are a bit more pre-structuring those. But the freedom over a 2-week period to explore your passions, whether that is a creative thing in terms of building a boat, or a combination of creative and intellectual. I'm thinking of a boy who spent, I think, 3 or 4 different project weeks. He was both an engineer and an artist, and he built a model. He wanted to build a working model of, I think it was a hummingbird, one of those birds where the body is heavier than it should be able to be to fly, but somehow it does. And he had this iterative experience of building a model, filming it, debriefing and analyzing what worked and what didn't, and then moving on. And he must have built 20 or 25 different models over these 3 or 4 different project weeks. Now, the normal romanticized experience of these projects in the world around us is, well, I hope he succeeded at the end, but check out the definition of success. In any one of those 2-week periods, he might have been very frustrated because he didn't get the thing to fly until one of his last project weeks. But he learned a tremendous amount about the scientific process and about his engineering and about the physics of it, which I would never understand. And in each of those 2-week periods, he might have felt the frustration of not having a successful outcome, but that would shift for him because the success of it was the learning process. And this boy ended up going on to Carnegie Mellon, a bright kid, really capable. Part of what he had to offer that application to Carnegie Mellon was this experience of many, many weeks where his agency and his authority were the mainstay of what was going on. And he could make an argument, well, look, this is what I can do when you give me responsibility and autonomy. And I think that plays very well with colleges sometimes. Mm-hmm. So that's a project week. Independent study is the same idea, but it goes across an entire term, and it usually is necessarily more academic in its foundation.
Okay, great. And I know we just have a few minutes left, but I'd love to talk a little bit about what it is that parents ask you when they call up and ask about Putney. What are those questions that you wish could just sort of be pinned at the top of the web page so that everybody had this understanding coming in?
You know, truthfully, Elisabeth, I don't find any questions frustrating or vexing because I happen to enjoy the learning process that families go through, as I'm sure you do. Mm-hmm. And talk about iterative research. That's what's going on in the search process. So I love doing whatever I can to help as they're building their sense of what's important to them and their children, and their perspective. The questions that families will ask usually depends upon how much they already know about the school. So if they're just getting acquainted with the school and they discover that kids don't get letter grades until the middle of their junior year, that's usually a point of surprise and worry. And of course, the first version of that question is, well, do they get grades? And my quick response is absolutely. Students are getting assessed all the time. The difference at Putney for the first few years, while the kids are learning how to be students, is that we're trying to give them space to have conversations with their teachers and vice versa about learning, not performance. So instead of us arguing about whether you earned a B+ or an A-, we're actually getting to talk about, in my class, for example, the research process, how we translate variables into measurable data that we can gather, et cetera. And that's a culture that once they get to the middle of the 11th grade year and start thinking about college, they're looking at actual letter grades that they've been given, and they're not surprised because they've been getting a tremendous amount of feedback along the way. And we've been creating a culture where teacher and students speak to one another about what learning means and what progress and achievement mean. And we're not burdened by worrying about the A- or the B+. Does that, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, this has been so helpful, and I think, really provides a good sort of caption about Putney, and there is so much more to know. And obviously we'll have provided all of the information for everyone to get in touch with you. But thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure always to give people a chance to see how different high school can be.
Great. Well, I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.